All right. I know it's always challenging to come back in from those breaks, but thank you for coming back in. We want to thank once again our sponsors, including our bronze sponsor here, the Aerospace Corporation. Let's hear from them now.
Moon River, wider than a mile, I'm crossing you in style someday. Old dream maker, you heartbreaker, wherever you're going, I'm going your way. Two drifters off to see the world. There's such a lot of world to see. We're after the same rainbow's end, waiting round the bend. My huckleberry friend, Moon River, and me.
Good morning. We are the Avengers, Aerospace Corporation, as you can see. Moon River Avengers, I guess. I'm Mary Christian Chester. I am the Systems Director for Exploration Operations at the Aerospace Corporation. As we've discussed this week, the landscape of space is changing. We see commercial space companies growing in their leadership and deployment of our next generation space systems. The Space Command, Space Force, and NASA are accelerating deployment of innovative space capabilities. In our role as a federally funded research and development center, an FFRDC, the Aerospace Corporation is evolving our approach to support both government and industry in their efforts to explore and utilize space in the national interest. Aerospace has a long history of supporting launch and space systems through trusted, independent mission assurance. As an FFRDC, we are uniquely positioned to help government and industry partners develop and implement creative, cost-effective solutions to meet their space objectives. From the NASA perspective, given this audience, Aerospace's engineering and decision support includes Artemis Mission Systems engineering, architecture assessments, lifecycle review management, and stakeholder engagement, both domestic and internationally, systems engineering on the Human Landing System program, human spaceflight and in-space transportation modeling in areas like ECLIS and cryogenic propulsion, innovative propulsion system design, test and technology development, small spacecraft avionics, acquisition support, including reviews for programs like EHP, and contract support and data management strategy for teams like Next Step 3 Appendix B, all of which we're able to do in our unique complementary role as an FFRDC. We've talked a lot this week not only about NASA missions, but the innovation occurring across the space enterprise. In Aerospace's role as the SE&I FFRDC for space, we work alongside both NASA and the DoD in addition to our industry engagements, so we have a unique vantage point to help bridge efforts across commercial, defense, and civil space, ensuring we move forward together as one spacefaring nation. I'm honored today to introduce the next panel discussing the challenges and intricacies of managing risks in a fiscally constrained environment. As we know, much of the Artemis portfolio is interdependent, and constraints in one program can cause delays and increased costs in another. this topic, when I was thinking about it, makes me think of the old adage, we can do it safely, on time, or on budget, but you can only have two of the three. The panel's moderated by Dave Radzanowski, and Rads, I'm looking forward to hearing which two you each choose.
All right, thanks very, very much. Appreciate the intro. I never thought about my walk-on music being Moon River. Generally, I'd go with Paralyzer from Finger 11, but Moon River might be my new walk-up music. I hope we're in the home stretch, folks. We're around the corner, coming into the home stretch. And I really do hope you've enjoyed the 3 days of symposium. For those of you who've been able to be here since Monday, as we focus on our theme of igniting innovation. And of course, realizing effective innovation, particularly when taxpayer dollars are involved, where there's accountability, constraints, uncertainty, as the fireside chat talked about the uncertainty facing us today. We do need to figure out how we balance those risks, the cost, the schedule, while trying to push forth our space enterprise. On day one, we heard about CLIPS. We have small budgets, limited NASA oversight. We also discussed on day one about how test infrastructure can help reduce risk in development and perhaps shorten schedules down the road by finding problems before you start to fly. We also talked about the adoption of AI tools and how that could increase efficiency. But that also potentially induces new risks that we haven't experienced before. Yesterday, we received an update on the progress, complexities, and plans for Artemis 3 and beyond as humans endeavor to return to the moon and on to Mars. And we also received some insight on the innovative thinking going into setting up our future lunar infrastructure and what are the needs and the constraints. Power we heard a lot about going forward. Finally, this morning, we heard about what comes next after ISS and the future dependence on our commercial partners. And then we had our fireside chat as an outlook of what's happening in terms of the fiscal reality of our commercial space industry. And I'm going to go up a little script there because I talked to a couple of students afterwards. And Alan and Claire, are you still here? Or yeah, okay. So they're like, man, that was depressing, right? So just to share, you guys are in the right enterprise. Don't worry. When I started in 1990 working on the Hill on Congress, the headlines were about the future of NASA. What is the future of NASA? Why are we even spending money on NASA? We're 4 years removed from the Challenger accident. We had just launched Hubble on the shuttle, and the mirror didn't work. And Space Station Freedom, it's going to take too long, and it's going to be too expensive. And why are we even doing this? And some of you folks know it passed continuation of station by one vote on the Hill. But after listening to the 3 days of panels we've had today, if I thought where this space enterprise would be today, I would have been, oh man, I had no idea where we'd come. And so what we're going to do today is talk about how do we deal with these risks, this cost, the schedule, and everything, and the uncertainty, and yet look how far we've come. And I hope to be around for another 35 years. And I'm really excited about where we're going to be on the Von Bonn Symposium and in 2060 or whatever. And as there'll be, you guys will be, the young folks up there will be the ones that are sitting up here and saying, yep, we have moon colonies, we have Mars colonies. So do not get discouraged. That's my final lesson. What I'm going to do in this panel is I'm going to briefly introduce our panel and then give each an opportunity to perhaps go into depth about more of their background in that, but more set the stage for today's discussion We cover the gamut of experiences here. We have Ron Birk, who you've all seen on some panels earlier today. Works at Aerospace as our principal director for the Space Enterprise Evolution Directorate. He's also the AAS president, and thank you for putting this forward.
Honored to serve.
Yep. And then we have Karla Jackson, who's vice president of contracts, BA Space and Mission Systems, a real acquisition procurement expert, recently retired from NASA as the head of their senior procurement executive. Understands a lot about procurements, and we talked a lot about in the past 3 days about fixed cost and fixed price and Space Act agreements. And then finally, we have Phil McAlister, who is an amateur golfer. He's retired NASA, and but he was the senior director for commercial space at NASA for many years, and really moved NASA forward when it came to commercial partnerships. After the intro, I have a few questions. You know, I got a lot of questions, so I really don't want to get through all my questions. So at a certain point, I'm going to open it up to you all. Be prepared to ask questions of the amazing expertise of folks we have on this panel. So with that, Ron, why don't we start with you? You know, introduce yourself and give you your thoughts about our panel's topic today.
All right, thank you, Rads, and thank you all. It's great to be on this panel, and absolutely great to be with you all here for the whole symposium. So as Rad said, within the Aerospace Corporation, I lead a group that is focused on space enterprise evolution. And as we are fond of saying, you know, we really focus on looking at what's different through the windshield and through the rear view. And we have seen, to Rad's points, tremendous changes coming our way. And it's interesting, I'm beginning to note that more and more of that scenery is now out the side windows. It's not just through the front. So within that context, we focus on areas like cislunar ecosystems, in-space servicing, assembly and manufacturing, space traffic management, and other, I'll say, functional areas, as well as evolving techniques and engineering approaches, in particular the use of AI in space systems and digital engineering for space and digital engineering environments. So as I offer just a very brief sort of a context here, I'd like to highlight that we have an ACE panel. We have acquisition, commercialization, and engineering, right? So here's your ACE panel. So what I'm going to just touch on very briefly is the importance of the engineering dimension. Colleagues and I have been working on this activity that we refer to as solving the puzzle of evolving space ecosystems. We've heard references to ecosystems almost continuously across these 3 days, and increasingly across the community. One of the characteristics of ecosystems is that there are a range of different ways that different entities interact. They can certainly be symbiotic. They can also range all the way to parasitic in the different ways that things interact. And it is notable that with 12,000 space companies globally, 5,000 in the US, there's a lot of capability that's coming into the ecosystem. So it's going to be increasingly important to be able to identify ways and means for those companies to interact and establish interoperability and in the context of being able to perform what they want to do, and in the context of this panel on risk, and ensure that they do no harm to each other in the process.
Thanks, Ron. Karla?
Yes, my name is Karla Smith-Jackson. I am the Vice President of Contracts for BAE Space and Mission Systems. And I've been here on board for about 2.5 months. It was a brand new position they created. BAE Space and Mission Systems has 4 different what we call strategic business units. So we have a space systems group that has civil space, it has military space, and then national space, which is the intelligence component. And then we have tactical solutions, which they're like a major prime, I should say a sub, in the supplier base to a lot of major primes for big platform systems like F-22 and a lot of missile programs and that kind of thing. And then we have our ground systems and services group, which obviously it's self-explanatory what we do, but we do provide services, and then we do create ground systems. So this particular job is really interesting to me, and it fits my background well. I just retired with 34 years of experience, primarily at Missile Defense Agency. I started in the early 90s, so we're all about the same age, I guess. And when it was the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, and we were trying to build that missile defense capability for the nation. It was National Missile Defense, and then later became GMD. So I have a lot of experience, once again, with innovative solutions and solving hard problems. And then we used to say making missile defense a reality, hitting a bullet with a bullet. I consider myself a plank holder in some of those acquisition strategies there. And then most recently, prior to coming to NASA, I did develop with, some will remember Dr. Mike Griffin, when he was R&E, the acquisition strategy for the next generation interceptor. A lot of things I'll talk about there with respect to competition and the way that you push innovation there. And then coming to NASA, it was a great time for me to transition from DoD to NASA. I guess 2 weeks after I joined NASA, we made the selection for the Human Landing System. And then shortly thereafter, the acquisition strategy was developed with myself, Bob Cabana, Pam Melroy, and a couple others, as far as how we would bring actually Blue Origin 1 and kind of have a leader-follower for our human landing system. But then other systems, I was blessed, I'll say, or fortunate to be a part of, like the LTV program, the deorbiting of the ISS, and many others over just the last 4 years, a lot of really innovative acquisition strategies and use of different vehicles and incentives. And so that's kind of what I'm bringing to the table, this business and acquisition lens. And then I also want to mention my last position, I was a principal on the FAR Council, one of 3 signatories. And so we are in a real, I'll say, crossroads because the FAR is being rewritten. And so I was a big contributor there to streamline acquisition regulations through an EO that President Trump wrote. So we're in a really unique place. And I want to just say I'm excited and energized by where we are with respect to acquisition and aerospace and aeronautical developments, because I think right now more than any time in the last 40 years, we're going to be able to innovate with respect to looking at acquisition regulations and policies. So thanks.
Thank you, Karla. Phil?
So, hey, everybody. Phil McAlister of nothing. I'm retired. It's the first time in my life my badge just has my name with nothing underneath. And if you're wondering, it's pretty awesome. So I'm enjoying it. But I just retired in January, so not too long in the tooth. Still have some thoughts and things to share. And I want to thank you guys for showing up. When I saw that the title of our panel was Risk Management and there was going to be a bunch of students, I figured there'd be a lot of, like falling asleep or something like that. But risk management is, in terms of human spaceflight, which is what I'll probably talk about mostly, it's just critically important. It's not the sexiest thing, but certainly for commercial crew, we spent a ton of time talking about risk management and how we were going to share risks across the government and the private sector, and I hope to talk a little bit about that today. I really feel like this is kind of an interesting time, certainly in LEO for human spaceflight. It is a more commercial endeavor every single day, right? We have commercial suborbital flights monthly. In terms of Crew Dragon, a third of those missions have been commercial, either private astronaut missions or free flyers like Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn. So, and I think it's only going to get, we're not going back to more government missions to LEO, it's only going to get more and more commercial. And I think we are at a time when we need to talk about the risk management paradigm, because I think it needs to change. NASA right now is the de facto regulator for human spaceflight, orbital human spaceflight. And they're also the customer. NASA isn't a regulatory agency, and I think we need to begin the conversation about how to really enable this enterprise to go forward. Because as much as NASA has a lot of great capability, it really lacks the capability of making balanced trades between safety and cost effectiveness, because all of our incentives are geared towards safety. For commercial crew, we have about 300 top-level requirements for Crew Dragon and Starliner. They were all safety-related. So I do think that conversation needs to change. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I look back and we first started regulating airline traffic, airline safety, with the passage of the Air Commerce Act in 1926, just 23 years after Wilbur and Orville did their first orbital flight. So I do think, big picture, risk management, we need to start having that conversation and not be reactive about it, be very thoughtful about it, and not wait for something, some big event to force us. It might not have a lot of hope after the last conversation because we don't do anything unless we're forced, it seems like. But I wanted to sort of throw that out there because a lot of you guys, as you enter into your careers and entering this agency, I think it's going to be increasingly important. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Phil. And since you're tanned, ready, and rested, I'm going to throw the first question at you.
All right.
But as with all the questions, any members of the panel, feel free to weigh in. But first, I'll start with you, Phil. As we've seen in the space enterprise, and you've heard from a lot of panels, both civilian and national security space agencies increasingly relying on partnering with the commercial space industry, as well as international organizations. So for you, Phil, how can collaboration help distribute or mitigate the risk or increase the risk when funding is tight and or schedules are critical?
So that's an interesting way you asked the question about when schedules are short or funding's tight. What I would say is don't do a partnership if that's your only goal. Don't just do it just because you don't have enough money. There is a certain environment and conditions that need to exist for a successful partnership. And I've talked about them many times. You need to have, you can't be pushing the state of the art technologically. If you're doing that, the private companies can't estimate their costs with a high degree of certainty, and they're not going to enter into a fixed price contract. You need to have the possibility of other customers, non-NASA customers. You need to have a vibrant commercial space industry, companies that are technically and financially capable of doing the job. And I think you also need NASA or the government as sort of an anchor tenant or an anchor customer. I'm not talking about a specific percentage, but the private sector needs to at least have some likelihood that they're going to get a return on their investment. So I can't tell you how much. So do it when you should do it, not necessarily because you have to because you don't have enough money, because that will not succeed. I can't tell you how many times I was in meetings where NASA would say, this is how, somebody at NASA would say, well, this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to do it commercially, and it's just like a little cloud with the word commercial in it, and somehow magically that's going to make it cheaper. No, you've got to think, it's not only do you do it in the right instance, but you have to think through what that means when you're doing things commercially. You can't just go into it and say, I'm going to do everything I was going to do exactly the same way, it's just going to be magically cheaper. No, you really have to change fundamentally the way you're going to do business, and you have to think through what that change means and how you're going to accomplish it. You can't just say, I think we need to do this, and people are going to go along, because the change part is going to be hard. I've been in a lot of meetings with procurement and other organizations, sorry, Sheila, and they'll kind of do the little bait. Oh, I can change, you know, we can change that, or we can tailor this document, until it gets time when you have to tailor it. And then people kind of retreat to their comfort zone. They're like, oh, well, you can't change that. I didn't mean that. I'm like, well, that's the thing you got to change. You know, you can't change the easy stuff, or you won't be you might be successful, but you won't achieve a break from your previous experience. So if you really want to do something innovative, something cheaper, maybe quicker, maybe better, you really got to think through about how you're going to change and be willing to do it. It's hard to get people to change, and change management was something that I spent a lot of time on within NASA and commercial crew. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Karla?
To jump in. So I think one of the things Phil said was really important, this idea of the fact that commercial is in vogue, that to say something is commercial. And what we see with the government customer right now is we do have these constrained fiscal budgets, and they are looking for industry to, I'm going to use the word subsidize budgets, but we have to be mindful about, is that a good fit? And so if we're using and we're making developmental systems, or we're doing research, or we're talking about low TRL levels, a partnership is probably not the right thing to do. And if you do use another transaction agreement, then you really need to look at the reimbursable or some kind of a hybrid and back to sharing the risk. Pushing, and I know I have some government people that are private citizens here, but pushing the risk 100% over on industry to subsidize and figure out the problem isn't really going to help. But what we need to do when we do, I'll say, partnering with the government is we need to have open lines of communication. That means we need to let the government customer choose that right instrument that allows technical interchange meetings, some requirements definition, some concept exploration, and we need to walk the government through some of the things like positive cash flow or at least neutral cash flow, or what does it mean when a business case does not close, what is a return on sales. There's a lot of things in industry terminology and the way that industry has to make business decisions, be it what you would consider traditional industry or what you might say is new space, new industry, whether you're looking at educational institutions or research institutions. There's differing ways to manage that risk. And each of those particular sectors bring something different to the fight or bring something different to the business strategy. And I would submit that the government only has the best of intent in order to get the best outcome. But sometimes they don't have benefit of the information. And so the one thing I just want to make sure that I wanted to prepare and present today was we've got to find ways to communicate better with government, explain challenges that exist with respect to technology areas or delivery dates or schedules, and even the realism that it takes with respect to, is that budget going to be able to deliver what they're asking for? And then look for ways to make those trades so that we might be able to do something called spiral development, which was in the 2000s. But maybe we deliver some capability and then we move forward and do additional capability. But this is the role of industry, the way that I see it, as we work with the government customers to provide these options to allow the customer to make the trades, as opposed to giving a single point solution to some of these problems. Thanks.
And Karla, Ron, anything?
Absolutely. So Karla and Phil, thank you. And it sets a really good stage for a couple of points I'd like to share. So open lines of communication, extremely important. And in the engineering context, I think it's particularly important to recognize that there continues to be the need for systems engineering and systems engineering and integration when companies are engaged in a solution set. Karla, you made the point about development has its own characteristics, but when we're talking about deployment, so if we take a scenario, a future scenario like a Moon Village, and we're thinking about actually engaging, between NASA's objectives and vision for a Moon Village and companies' ability to deliver different capabilities on that path, there is a need for a common engineering environment for that community to work in, because it's not just the negotiation between a company and, for instance, NASA. It's the negotiation on the puts and takes and interoperability between the companies. And we've recognized that that takes a whole different level of engineering than we've had for our legacy bespoke systems, because you've got a different governance structure. So just very briefly introducing a triquetra. And for those of you who may be familiar, this is a Celtic symbol that looks like a three-lobed infinity symbol, right? So just get that image in your mind. But three different types of engineering. The enterprise engineering for coordinating between organizations, which is critical in this context. The ecosystem engineering, which is traditional, how do the systems actually interplay and do no harm to each other, and then introducing digital engineering so that there's a common environment between the two. So.
Great, thank you, Ron. Next question, and Karla, I want to go to you on this in terms of, you were involved with thinking about the FAR and how it evolves in that. So could you talk a little bit about how contracting and our acquisition strategies do need to change for this ongoing environment? Not only that, when you have all these commercial partners and industry, and you've got taxpayers, you've got shareholders, you've got other countries are involved. So how do you think about how our acquisition needs to change?
So first thing I wanted just to mention as an acquisition professional, and I'm not an engineer, is that partnership that business professionals need to have with the engineers and the scientists to be able to understand what it is that's being procured or what it is that we're selling if you're on the industry side. Basically, that knowledge and understanding allows you to structure a business deal that fits. With respect to the FAR, you know, I said it's like a once-in-a-generation thing. The last time we rewrote the FAR was in 1984. So it is generational. What this administration is allowing the government to do this time is remove a lot of those barriers to entry, like things like cost accounting standards and some of the accounting things that are prohibitive that would allow some companies not to want to do business with the government. So there's that. There's also a number of tools that are not just FAR regulation based that are going to be pushed, which is like commercial solutions offerings or more of the other transaction. In fact, NASA was the first agency to have other transaction authority. That's what the Space Act Agreement is. The difference between a Space Act Agreement and now I'm going to get geeky for a second, and a normal other transaction is because the main reason why NASA was given that authority was to foster basically a commercial space enterprise. Way back in the 60s, there was a thought that there could be this commercial space and it needs to benefit that, I'll say that ecosystem since we're using the word ecosystem. In most cases, the DoD use of OTs, and even if you look at some of the other civilian agencies that are using OT, there's a direct benefit. A Space Act Agreement is not supposed to be used, and Phil can correct me, if it's just a direct benefit to NASA. It's supposed to be a benefit to NASA, but then a benefit to the that particular industry, that is the space or the aeronautics industry. So as you look at the FAR, if you take those ideas, one of the things that I think that what the government's trying to do now is to basically provide tools in the toolkit. So you will see when they're done with the FAR, it'll probably be about a third of its size, and a lot of the content will be put in what we call, they call them like ground rules or policies, best practices, and that kind of thing, because the FAR had gotten quite prescriptive over the years about the how-to, and there's many ways to get things done, but what was happening was we were limiting the ability of our contracts and procurement professionals to do the critical thinking and the business, what I'll call it, acumen, to be able to develop new and innovative ways. So what I look at, when I look at the FAR and I look at some of the EOs about the use of commercial practices, is it's kind of freeing and unleashing, that's the word that people like now, unleashing this freedom to try something different. And when you try something different, we have to be really careful we don't go too far to one side with the pendulum or back, because if we get, I'll say, too free, then it could be abused. But there are what I consider hybrid opportunities where some things could be fixed price, some things could be commercial, some things could be cost reimbursable. And the other thing, there are a couple other quick thoughts about IP and data rights. Many times the government does not need the IP or the data rights, and there's a premium being paid for those things. If in fact there is a service offering, if not known now, at some point in the future, industry should try to retain those data rights and retain the commercial, I'll say the commerciality that would be associated with that, along with this idea of dual use technology. And if you look at these new regulations will do that as well. If you look at dual use technology where you might have multiple government bill payers, meaning there could be a defense application, a civil space application, and maybe even just a general civilian application. If you look at some of the law enforcement community, some of the communications community that's doing things in communications, that's how to reduce the price, is for industry to bring to bear, I'll say, multiple bill payers and multiple users of technology. And so in this environment, if I speak to the students, this is where you get to put your thinking cap on as an engineer or as a technologist to be able to say, hey, what about all these other applications? And then there's a business strategy to be wrapped around that. And so for those reasons, if for no other reason, I feel like we're at a really unique place to be able to offer that innovation. And I think I was mentioning to Phil, his daughter was choosing a major. I said, don't forget the business classes, because we really do need to have that scientific engineering background along with the understanding of business. So, thanks.
Ron or Phil, any comments on that?
Yeah, just briefly, it's notable that NASA issued an acquisition and digital engineering handbook in 2021. And that was in a similar time frame, speaking of defense and dual use, right, a similar time frame that the DoD issued digital engineering guidance, and the Space Force stood up as born digital. And the idea was that every acquisition that they did from scratch, that was initiated, was going to be digital throughout. So there'd be a digital twin at the architecture, the ConOps level, and then the digital twin would be used as the basis of acquisition, right? And NASA has a handbook on that approach. It's not been broadly implemented, but it is in play, and we are witnessing the defense community, the Space Force in particular, going further and further down that path. There are efficiencies to that process. I've had the good fortune of talking to a number of people who, companies and organizations who have in fact done that, and they found tremendous efficiencies. They've reported on the order of 30% cheaper production of a final product because they find the problems much further forward before they start bending metal and hiring armies of, of people to support the development that have to sit around and wait when a problem needs to be solved. So it's just it's an element of this process.
Phil?
Yeah, so Rad's, your question was acquisition strategies, and Karla crushed that, so I'm not going to touch that. But you did ask about sort of different risk tolerances between the private and public sector. And what that brings to my mind is what's called the COFR statement within human spaceflight. COFR stands for Certification of Flight Readiness. So at NASA, we have this big meeting before a mission. We go through all the risks and all the parameters associated with the mission and the hardware. And then senior leaders at NASA sign a document that says, I am asserting that this mission is safe to fly. And they assert that to the NASA administrator, who accepts it, and then we go, or doesn't, and we go fly. And that was the way we did it in shuttle. NASA had full responsibility for the safety of that mission. And it was a very straightforward risk process. With Commercial Crew, it was very different. We didn't own the Starliner and the Crew Dragon. Those were owned and operated by the company. So we needed to come up with a brand new risk model where we had what we call a shared assurance model. The companies assert that they have met NASA's requirements, and NASA then verifies it. So it's a shared responsibility. And so the way we got, and the problem was that most of the NASA senior leadership was comfortable with the old one, and it was like, well, you're asking me to sign to say whether this is safe. We're like, no, we're not asking you to do that. So we spent a lot of time on the wording of that COFR statement to reflect the shared assurance model. And the wording we came up with is, you are verifying that the companies have met the requirements. We're not asking you to say it's safe. We're not asking you to take some pledge that said this is safe. We're saying, did the company meet these requirements? We spent a lot of time on these requirements, and we all agreed that if they met those requirements, it would be safe to fly. So we changed the COFR statement to say, I am asserting that the companies have met the requirements. And the senior leaders had a slightly different version for all that. And that worked pretty well, but not as good as we wanted it to, because the government people still felt that accountability and said, I'm still going to be held accountable if this mission goes badly, so I want this extra test. And we still needed their signature, regardless of what the words say. I'm not saying they said, I don't care what the words say. They did care. But at the end of the day, they're like, well, if you want my signature, I still want an additional test. I want this additional analysis, even though maybe everybody in the program office was agreed that the companies had met that requirement. So that is a very, very different model than we've ever had before, right? So, and it took a culture change to a large extent that was partially successful, but not fully successful. But you can see that was one of the ways we addressed these different risk tolerances between the private sector and the public sector in terms of NASA. I thought it was a really good model, but it has yet to be implemented in any other human spaceflight program that I'm aware of. So while it was a really good advancement, I felt like we didn't take the next step, and in some cases have kind of reverted back, which you've got to be careful about. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Thank you to all three of you. And Ron, I'm going to go to you, and then folks, I'll go to the audience next. Get ready, and make sure if you have questions for Phil to ask them in this open forum, because he's running to the airport as soon as we're done, so you're not going to be able to catch him right after this. So Ron, engineering side of things, you've always been a really great proponent of digital twins, we've talked about AI, model-based simulation and that. What investments do we need to make to provide evolved tools and improve the space enterprise so that we can address a lot of these risks in a cost-efficient manner? The panel you moderated on Monday talked about that infrastructure and how it can be used for test and evaluation and everything. But why don't you go into a little more depth on where we can make some investments to move this forward?
Yeah, Raz, I appreciate that. And for those of you who are here, I really applaud the members of that panel, and in particular reflect on Patrick Toby's work, where he talked about having the depth and breadth of model-based system engineering through digital engineering for the shuttle. I'm sorry, the SLS, right? And you know, when we listen to him talk, I mean, right, really high level of excitement, high depth of knowledge, and appreciation of all of the components that go into the SLS, and the years of activity to make sure that they all came together. I think he even used his hands this way, right? And ultimately to deliver a successful Artemis I mission. Absolutely fantastic. If we expand that concept and recognize that everything he talked about can be done at a system of systems level, right? Not just the launch vehicle, but you know, for instance, the whole Artemis system with Orion and HLS and the EGS and ground systems on the lunar systems, and then even take it out further to the entire, say, cislunar ecosystem. The investments that you mentioned, we're so fortunate we're actually seeing a set of organizations develop and deploy digital engineering environments. We had a sense that there must be groups that were doing this a couple of years ago, right, because it just makes sense, it's logical. So we pulled together a sort of a grassroots level workshop that was held out at JPL in July of '24. We thought we'd get 20, 30 players. We thought it was going to be very niche. 200 people rather, 60 organizations showed up. We cataloged 30 different environments. That led to a series of workshops, and we just held the 5th of those, was hosted at the Kennedy Space Center just 2 weeks ago. And there's over 800 people now and well over 100 organizations. So the response is that the community is investing in these tools. Which is wonderful, and the policy is in place, right, which is wonderful. The next couple of steps are, you know, to continue to evolve the acquisition practices to actually call for the use of these tools, which some do, but many don't, and to verify and validate the tools themselves. Okay? If you're going to make decisions about multiple billion-dollar programs that are based on digital engineering tools, it would be really nice if you trusted them.
Risk management.
Yeah, risk
Karla?
management, that's right.
Phil, any additional comments on that? Okay, great, fantastic. All right. Jim, any online questions that we have? Questions from the audience? Jeff Faust.
Way back left. And in the middle right there. So all the way top left.
Top left.
Let's go top left first.
So the one thing that I did want to ask about is a fiscally constrained environment, as you've put it, also means limited scope by necessity. And one of the risks of a limited scope is scope creep. How do you ensure that between a customer who has, on one hand, a written set of requirements, a SAL, those sorts of documents, and on the other hand, has certain expectations that may or may not align with those documents? How do you communicate and navigate in that environment where you deal with the possibility of scope creep and constrained scope to manage both the risk of not completing the program and the risk of going over budget when you have a very constrained budget.
All right, Karla, you want to?
Answer,
Yeah.
and then I'll let the experts. And we run into this, or we used to when I was at NASA, and I'm sure they still do. This idea of change management. And so this idea of what is your change management process, what is your governance process associated with change management, so that it's not so easy to make a change. You have all of the different disciplines. It might be the mission assurance, engineering, you'll have like the finance people, the contracting people, but everyone should weigh in on this change and what does it mean. The other thing that is a challenge, that why you need this really robust, when you have like an Artemis and you have a system of systems, one change in one component or in one aspect drives change throughout. And sometimes, I'm just gonna say sometimes, people don't realize that, and they're trying to make a change on their individual component of their individual subsystem. And then later on, we find out there were all these other changes, this ripple effect. And so if you put the really robust change management system in place, you'll be able to take care of that. There is a good example that Missile Defense Agency does use. They have a change control board that meets and has all the different disciplines you wouldn't even expect to be there. Even like the HR people are there, because sometimes changes drive, a change in your manning or your staffing. People can easily get overcommitted. But that's one of those things where a PM really needs to be well aware, and we talked in the prep about culture management, that people need to recognize when they have a tendency to make changes because it seems easy, or they have a tendency to get in there with the industry partner and turn the wrench with them. And then that drives a change. So that's what I'll just say from a procurement and an acquisition perspective. Thanks.
Great. Phil?
Yeah, I got a couple. So I think the biggest tool is the change from cost plus contracting to fixed price. If you're if you're managing a cost plus contract as a NASA person, it's just super easy to have scope creep. You just need to get more money from Congress. So that's hard to do, but once you've got an ongoing program, they tend to get bigger and bigger over time. So the move from NASA to more fixed price contracting has produced more discipline in that scope creep process, but then you still need good program managers to maintain that discipline and your baseline set of requirements. For commercial crew, I think I mentioned this, we had about 300 top-level requirements for the companies. 5 years later, we had only changed 5% of those requirements. So getting the requirements right up front and then not having continual changes and having the discipline for the program managers to say, no, that might be a little bit better, but this requirement is still good enough. Because once you do a change, man, it just gets crazy. You got to negotiate that change. That takes forever. The lawyers get involved, and the procurement people good-naturedly want to get involved to make sure no one's getting taken advantage of. It takes forever, and it drives up cost. And when you're trying to do something commercially, that is death. So you got to have good program managers. You got to have the right culture, which it's a work in progress, I would say, at NASA. But those are the two big things: the change from cost plus to fixed price. Really get some discipline on that. Having the right program managers that are aware of the downsides of these continual changes.
Ron, you have anything to add?
Just a really brief, also considering service-based acquisitions, right, as a way to manage or avoid scope creep.
Thanks, sir.
Although we've seen that, even on clips, we've added all kinds of new requirements, insight requirements, reviews, oversight, more detailed proposals, even though that's totally a service. So you can see us kind of reverting back to our comfort zone, and we really have to avoid that.
And that was talked about in the CLIPS panel on day one, where after the lessons learned, there was some more thinking that maybe there needs to be some more insight and oversight of NASA. And industry was saying, at least the folks that are on the panel, is like, that might not be a bad thing, however. So it's a trade. It's really a trade. Other questions out here? Is there one in the middle there? Yes.
So in the like most recent era, we've seen the rise of like really big startups that have lofty dreams and goals. How can these startups leverage relationships with larger companies to grow themselves and their partner companies effectively while still maintaining competitive advantage?
Want to grab that? Karla, thank you.
So I'll put a plug in for what NASA calls the Office of Small Business Programs. And every executive agency has to have a small business office. And so for the most part, the larger agencies you're going to find do matchmaking. And if it's a brand new large program, like I'll take Golden Dome, for instance, they just had this huge industry day actually down here in Huntsville. And there were opportunities for matchmaking at that point. So if you're a startup, if you work through that Office of Small Business Programs, that is their charge in life to do that. Another way to do that definitely is to go to the competition advocate. Every agency by law has to have a competition advocate because we do want, or the government does want, I'm changing charts here, more competition, and we want, as a government and as a taxpayer, that drives innovation. So there are 2 or 3 different entities that are pushing for that. So make sure if you're really interested and you want, I'll say, the customer's help, that's the way to get that. Some of the larger companies like BAE Systems does, and I know some of our competitors, we also sponsor matchmaking days, and we need subcontractors, and we're always looking for other suppliers or to diversify our supply chain. And so there are ways to get in contact with those people. Usually it's on their website, how to do business with and that kind of a thing, just as a start.
Ron, you were going to
Yeah, and
answer.
I'll take that as a softball. So professional societies like AAS are really good places for companies to find other companies that are synergistic. AIAA and many others. There's a set of 16 professional societies in the space domain that we recognize are regularly active, and through each of those are opportunities to make connections. Yeah.
Great. And I checking the time. I think we had one more question up there. Or one over here. Okay. Well, maybe we can do 2 more real quick. Let's go over here to my right. Then we'll end up on the left over here. Go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate the ACE diversity. I think it'll be uniquely qualified to help with this question. As we talk about risk and technical risk, mission assurance risk, crew safety risk, I think as a community we're very mature in how we communicate using risk cubes and articulating those risk positions. We have good communication channels for that. As we get into a government industry, especially where we're trying to develop commercial markets, the business risk there is, and help me understand, is that acumen and maturity sufficient to help the industry to understand their business risk, the funding, will adjacent markets develop, those kinds of things? Do we have a need there to develop acumen, or do we need to communicate better? I'd like to hear your comments on how we could differentiate those 2 risks and how we can get a little bit better on the business side.
Yeah, at NASA, we're terrible at that. We're not good at business risk. That's not what we're about. That's not an expertise we have, to be honest with you. I spent 20 years in the private sector before I joined NASA, so that was a skill set that I had, and it was very beneficial in doing commercial crew and cargo because we had to evaluate the business case to a certain extent. For cargo, we knew that we didn't really have a good understanding of that, so we brought in a venture capitalist to help advise us on those awards. And so I think we need to get information about the business case, but it's not something that NASA can necessarily control, and not necessarily that we have good tools to mitigate. So we need to incorporate that. We really need to understand if a company's getting all of their financing from external markets, that's a risk, right? If they're really dependent on a large non-NASA market, that might be a risk. So NASA has to evaluate those things, and we're not super good at doing that. So I think that's an area where we need some help. But the way to do it when you're not good at it is ensure you have competition. That is so critical. If anybody's heard me talk over the years, I am a huge advocate. When you're doing commercial acquisitions, you have to have competition. It not only diversifies your supplier base, so you're not reliant on a single supplier, it also gives gives NASA some leverage in contract negotiations, which is super important, right? So having competition, it insulates you to some extent from failure, which is good, and it diversifies your base. If somebody stumbles, you've got another supplier. So that is the way to mitigate that business risk, in my opinion, and why it is critically important, especially, I know, hey, we don't have enough money. Well, if you don't have enough money to have two, then maybe rethink things, because it's right. It's not going to be commercial. It's just, and the risk becomes super higher. So that aspect of competition is super important. Unless, NASA got this, small group that was really good at doing business case analysis. But that's super hard. Even venture capitalists miss on more than half. I've seen a lot of spreadsheets of new businesses, and they all come out black at the end, and yet half of those investments turn out to be not successful. So acknowledging that risk exists, acknowledging that NASA can't really do much about it, except competition. That's the way to insulate yourself.
Yeah, so NASA recognized, I want to say I got there in 2021, so recognized that this was a skill gap that existed, and so working with, at that particular time, the Chief Acquisition Officer, who is Pam Melroy, Deputy Administrator, we actually made some significant investments, one with UNC Chapel Hill, and we taught a class down here in Huntsville for the Marshall folks, brought people in from Kennedy, brought people in from Johnson to basically teach them. They were actually some Wall Street folks and some venture capitalists, but using basically a university, I'll say curriculum. It was like a 9-hour course or something like that with a case study, so that they could kind of learn and start that conversation. So they're very expensive courses, but that's been identified. They used to do a strategic human capital plan that had to be refreshed every few years, and so that remains one of the big areas of opportunity. There's also a gap analysis that was done with respect to program management skills. Some of our centers do better, or some of their centers do better than others. I would say the Goddard in particular had a very strong and robust program management training program, because that's a career-long training, right? That's not go to a class. That's you start when you're junior in your career and you mature that, so when you're making big milestone decisions and things, you know how to do those things. DoD does have a much more structured way to do that, and so the last couple of years we got some appointments at NASA, and we did send some folks to some DoD acquisition and program manager training, but it has to be a deliberate investment of money and time to get people to do that. And the shortcut to me to doing that is that what I talked about earlier is having industry come in and educate the government. Like, if we really do have these collaborative opportunities, be it technical interchange meetings. Technical interchange meetings doesn't have to be just engineering or PDR, CDR, and all that. It could actually be, let's talk about where your financing is, who your investors are, what kind of a cash flow do you have going on, what do your milestone payments look like. A lot of times the government wants to backload milestone payments, and there's also, there's upfront costs that are associated with a successful program that people might need to do for long lead or sustaining engineering. And you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, that a lot of times government doesn't even understand that. And it's not that they're willfully doing something to hurt industry, it's just literally they don't understand. And so that's one of the things that I've been pushing in the end of my career, and I'm happy to be on the industry side, because I think that communication and understanding, even if we could do an exchange of industry to government, would go a long way towards managing that risk. But like I said, that has to be a deliberate, thoughtful, intentional thing that's done. But it definitely is a gap from my perspective. Thanks.
Any comments?
Just a foot stomp that all of that, and add the value of master planning. There is a real need. You talk about a need for acumen and building capability, and being able to do master planning for space systems and solutions, and including the business cases, but beyond that.
All right. I know I promised one more question. If it's really quick, because we need to get off this stage and head to our lunch. No question? It's long. All right, come up afterwards. But I'd like to really thank this panel. Great topic, very broad and wide. Thanks very much. Move forward. Thank you all, and who's next on the stage? All right.
Hi, my name's Grayson Kunkel. I'm currently an undergraduate student here at UAH, majoring in aerospace engineering. I'm originally from South Haven, Mississippi, and I look forward to a career somewhere in electric propulsion. That concludes today's session in the theater. Please join us in the Student Services Building for lunch, a few awards presentations, and our conversation with former NASA administrators Charlie Bolden and Jim Bridenstine. See you at the luncheon.